Hello, Ryan here, and welcome to Star Citizen Sunday. This is a weekly show which covers all of the news from the week just past. Be sure to subscribe if you like what you see, and let's get on with it. This week, CIG share their thoughts on how the release of Alpha 3.13 and Invictus launch week went. Alpha 3.14 hits the open PTU, plus Star Citizen Live delves into the combat changes coming in Alpha 3.14 and beyond. So this week's Star Citizen Live was with members of the vehicle team answering our questions and talking further about the balance that is going on in Alpha 3.14, which is where the first question kicks off. What is happening in 3.14? Specifically, this question was relating to weapon range changes. So 3.14 brings huge changes to the combat system, and what they are trying to do is give every item, every ship and weapon its dedicated purpose. They want them to all have pros and cons, and to start with they have created different weapon categorizations, splitting up sizes 1 to 4 weapons from the sizes 5 and above weapons, as the 1 to 4s are typically employed by fighters, with the size 5s and above usually being carried by heavier ships. Now, most of the combat between two ships generally happens below 1200 meters, so they decided to not extend these ranges any further. Now, I also know it was mentioned a while back that one reason why they reduced the weapon ranges is to bring the fights in closer and make it far more visceral, so being able to actually see the enemy ship instead of always firing at UI or pixels. And personally, I really enjoy being able to not just see the ship I'm fighting itself, but the damage that I'm inflicting appearing as I hammer away. And I do think much of it comes down to the whole real versus fun challenge. Is it fun to just fire at UI from a distance in every engagement? Most likely not, but that isn't to say that range fighting doesn't have its place in Star Citizen. And with saying that, he does mention later on that they may introduce weapons which are more effective at further ranges, just not for 3.14. The focus for 3.14 is on making fighter ship combat fun. Now, they are removing the option to just continuously fire without consequences, so for the anti-fighter weapons like repeaters, these will empty their ammunition load a lot faster to enforce players to carefully decide when they want to use them. Now, personally, after testing out these changes, I can certainly say that combat is now much more of a thinking action, and you are not continuously on the offensive, and often finding yourself having to go on the defensive because you've maybe run out of energy weapon rounds and need them to replenish, or your shields are low and you want them to regenerate, or even you've messed up your attack run or the enemy has a much better angle. It feels way more faceted, and you find that you adapt based on what is happening instead of just turning around, holding down the fire button, going on an attack run, then turning around and doing the same rinse repeat action. For 3.14, they are trying to set up the foundation and framework, and then from there they will further define the weapons with more characteristics, and the balancing and tweaking will continue through more patches. So the next question is, how does this work knowing that you can't complete all the balancing in one patch? Now, they try to leave each patch that we have in a funner state as possible, and that can be difficult while they are continuing to tweak and balance. They also have to approach it carefully, as if they add something, they don't want to completely unbalance everything else. So they add little changes, get feedback, and then adjust as they go. Next question is, how do you plan to address the issue of larger ships being less capable of defending themselves against fighters? Now, they say that once they have the ability to address the velocity of the projectile, they will be able to tweak this value, and this should help ships like the Hammerhead, for example, get on target much quicker. Also, once physicalized damage is in, something like the Hammerhead is going to be much more of a tank and capable of taking more damage thanks to its thick armor. So, talking about physical damage, will all of this balancing have to be redone when armor and physical balance comes online? So he says basically they have to balance for the tech they have now and anticipate for the tech they will get in the future. Internally, they are preparing, discussing and testing for when this stuff comes online, but it will have to change somewhat when those features do come in. For physical damage, when it's ready, they will roll it out slowly and see what impact it has, then make the balance changes from there on. But I am pretty certain that many of the changes and balances that they are doing now will help for when this system comes online, as they will have that foundation to tweak from without having to start from scratch. So as much as a lot of this is to help make the current builds more fun and playable now, it will certainly be of assistance when physical damage and armor comes in. Next question is to do with the roles of each weapon type. So he says the balance to both energy and ballistic weapons have changed, but the roles of each weapon have not. Ballistics are desirable as they can do damage but are limited in way of ammunition, whereas energy are less powerful but you will never run out of ammo. Which leads nicely onto the next question: why were magazine sizes for ballistics reduced? Now this, they say, is mostly down to its role. Ballistics, as just mentioned, are supposed to feel limited but powerful. They want them to be specialized and they want all weapons to have purpose, so they upped the damage and reduced the ammo count to force more conscious choices. There is more work that they need to do on these in the future, and many of these changes will make more sense once this physical damage comes online. Will we be able to reload ballistics is the next question, and they say not for 3.14, but this will be talked about for some time down the line. Now I think it would be a good idea if they could bring in some form of ballistic reload option, but of course it will need to adhere to the balance of ballistic limitations. And with ballistic ammunition being physical, I do wonder if they would need a physical location on the ship to store extra canisters of ammunition. So we will have to see how that unfolds, but I definitely am not opposed to having a reload option. Next question: why does ballistic ammo have range in space? Shouldn't it just continue on indefinitely? Now this is because of a few reasons. In essence, it's because it's a game and there is limitations, especially in performance. If they had to track every projectile continuously through its lifespan, it would be way too heavy on performance. But also, they don't want to encourage engagements at crazy ranges. They want them to be closer, as we are seeing with all of these balance changes. Next question: currently there is no downside to sending out a ping. Is this intended? Now, it isn't intended, and eventually pinging will make you visible to other players, and coming soon, when certain emissions come on the ships, they're trying to categorize them to help the players understand what is happening. Ping, quantum, EMP for example, clarifying objects based on signatures. They are going to balance all the EM and IR signatures at some point, but they have just not had time to do that yet. So for 3.14, they have moved the scanning, radar and ping system off of being a ship-only system and have made it capable of working with any system that they want. So they are trying to keep the player-facing side of the whole scanning and radar system as close to how we know it, with some minor tweaks to make it more user-friendly, but under the hood it has had a huge overhaul that exposes lots of things that design can then use to change, fluctuate or add to. Next question: is it intended to only have a single manual ping option, or can we have intermittent or timed pings? Now they say the original design was always to be a single ping, but they will add the option for repeated pings at some point, but there will be consequences like continuously exposing yourself every time you do ping out. Next question: are gas clouds a good place to hide in 3.14? Basically, do they null your signatures? And unfortunately they didn't have time to add ambient areas to the environments for 3.14. This is intended to roll out in the next patch or two, and the room system, they say, can now do pressure, air and heat, as well as ambient values as well. So the system is fully fleshed out, but they just need to put it into the verse. Hopefully that will come in 3.15. So the next question is just, how is the balance going in 3.14 in general? Now they are happy that they haven't broken the balance, but they are not happy yet with where all the ship's weapons and so on fit. It will take some time and a lot of testing to get there, but they will perfect it. Now the next question is kind of a big one, or the answer is a big one. The question was, is there a specific time to kill that you are going for? So firstly, I will say that time to kill will not be applicable once physical damage and component systems are implemented, as the ships will no longer have a traditional health pool and just go boom once it reaches zero. A ship blowing up will only happen if a critical component, be that a power plant or fuel tanks, get destroyed, which I expect will be very difficult to do as they will be protected by the ship's hull, its armor and so on and so forth. Now the destruction of a ship will be very dynamic and systemic, and it will be more time to disable, so ships becoming immobile rather than just exploding, which then allows for greater gameplay depth, like boarding. The answer to this kind of went on for a long while, and Yogi did start talking about not wanting to expose numbers or the values of hit points and things, as he says that numbers don't really reveal whether something is better or worse. He actually spoke further about his answer on Star Citizen Live over on Spectrum, using race cars as an analogy. Basically, if two cars look the same on paper, but one can go from 0 to 60 in 5 seconds and the other in 4.8 seconds, that doesn't necessarily mean that the 4.8 second car will be the best and win the race, as there are many more factors to take into consideration, like handling, for example, not to mention the human element. What Yogi means, and I do agree with this, is that by exposing the numbers, this will only provide a very basic understanding of a ship. That said, I do personally still want to see those numbers just because I like having them and I like to play with them, but ultimately with Star Citizen ships, there is and will be far more factors to consider that are way more important than just numbers on a piece of paper, like handling differences due to thruster layout, item placements, ship part structures, cockpit visibility, and then you bring in the human element like personal preferences, individual strengths and weaknesses, and so on. The ships are that diverse that the numbers do not reveal the whole picture. But as I say, I would still like to see those numbers as they do help, but I understand where Yogi is coming from, and maybe there's something behind not revealing those numbers. But we will see how that evolves. So, kind of leading on from the numbers question, the next question is, every MMO has meta gameplay. Do you think it is actually possible to not have meta in Star Citizen? So based on what they have said and my understanding of how CIG is creating Star Citizen, I think there will always be a preferable loadout or an average loadout that people go to, but even now, current meta builds are only really foundations for each player to start from and then tweak to their preferences. As ships, weapons, damage and everything else starts to become more fleshed out and where it's intended to be, I personally think there will be so much choice and variation to how you set up your ship that meta just won't have a prominent place anymore. Not to mention much of the ship's loadout options will vary based on what you are actually doing in the game at any given moment. Not every scenario in the game will benefit from the same loadout or approach. And I personally believe that they can achieve, and actually are achieving somewhat in 3.14, a non-meta experience. For example, just having the highest DPS or Alpha Strike build does not mean that it is the best loadout for every situation, or that in your hands or someone else's hands you'll have the best ship and chance for every scenario. Star Citizen is far too granular for that, but it's good to have a foundation to start from, which is kind of what I use Urkel for. Now this will all be even more emphasized when, say, weapon characteristics are reintroduced and balanced. The attritions, for example, may have pretty high DPS, but when you factor in the weapon's range and temperature characteristics, so if you are above the most effective range or your weapons are below the optimal temperature, then that DPS means nothing. So again, it will be all very subjective to each individual based on personal preference, how they like to approach each different scenario, and that's before you even take your opponent or opponent's loadout and preferences into account. What I'm trying to say, and what I believe, is that the sheer depth and diversity in Star Citizen, I believe, will mean that meta is either not relevant or really insignificant. But that is my opinion based on what I expect to happen. We will, of course, have to wait and see as they develop all these systems. Anyway, let us move on. The next question is, do G-forces play a role in balance decisions? And they say yes, and they have brought the G-force tolerance levels to be more closer to the real world values, with plans for more balance to come in the future that will change combat geometry. Next question is to do with capacitor changes. Can you elaborate further about them with the current open PTU build? Now, energy ammo for energy weapons is being supplied by the weapon capacitor item that is on your ship itself and has X amount of ammo load and regen rates. Once it's online, it'll supply the weapons with the energy, which will be spread across all energy weapons on the ship, meaning that you can toggle weapons on and off, and it will automatically distribute that energy accordingly. This is then affected by the power triangle, so if you were to reroute your power to weapons, you gain more ammunition and faster regeneration rates of that ammunition. For shields, if you assign all the energy to the shields, you'll get faster regenerating shield rates, as well as greater resistance. And for thrusters, they have a limited pool of energy for the thrusters to boost, and prioritizing thrusters will increase the regeneration rate of the boost pool and reduce the cost of using it. This isn't finished, he says, and will be iterated on further down the line, but it does show the basic direction. At the moment, the capacitors are not physical items inside your ship, but they would like to make them physical so that they can be turned on, off, removed, and hopefully upgraded as well. That would be very nice. Next question, will shield hardening come back? Now, they didn't like how it was implemented in the past, as it was just an on or off function. In the future, they will bring in a more interesting implementation of this, which I expect will be more hands-on for multi-crew ships, allowing a crew member to take control. And the final question is, can we get capacitor profiles? And they said, yes, this is a great idea, and it is on the task list, but no dates. I personally love this idea. Having a profile to flip between for different situations does sound like a good plan. So that was the Vehicle Star Citizen Live this week. Something Jared mentions is that 3.14 is a new foundation to build upon for all aspects of ship combat and will evolve over the next few patches. This is the benefit of having a live product while they are still developing the game. It is an iterative process that will continue, and if you want to help, do jump in and provide detailed feedback. Now, I will add to that and say the combat in 3.14 does feel far more engaging, and I do look forward to seeing it evolve further, but do bear in mind it feels quite different to 3.13 and will take some time to get used to. When I first jumped in, it didn't feel great, it felt really slow, but as you get used to that pace, you start to see all the finite detail, and I have come to appreciate all those little facets. Of course, it is not complete yet and could change pretty drastically over the next few patches. However, I think it'll be more lighter changes here and there until physical damage comes in, at which point it will change the approach completely, but I do hope that the balancing done now will mean that weapons and ship behaviors, etc. won't feel too drastically different, but ultimately the approach to combat will feel different. Anyway, with that said, do let me know your thoughts about this week's Star Citizen Live. Let's move on. So also this week, the latest lore post is available. This week it is a booty call. Alpha 3.14 has rolled out to an open PTU, meaning that all backers have the opportunity to jump in and test the latest build and features. And finally, the latest post-mortem is available this week, talking about how well CIG felt the release of 3.13 and Invictus launch week went, of which I have covered in 2 separate videos, both of which are linked in the description below. So that brings us to the end of the show. If you do enjoy my content, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Also, I am able to do this thanks to my very generous patrons and channel members. If you appreciate what I do and would like to help make it even better from as little as $1 a month, all of the links are provided below.